Welcome to Creepshow, where we dive into the world of true crime and explore the chilling stories of notorious killers. Today, we're looking at a unique aspect of serial murder, the use of aliases. These killers used fake identities to evade capture, deceive their victims, and confuse investigators, sometimes for years. From cunning con artists to ruthless murderers who changed names as often as they changed towns, these killers managed to hide in plain sight. In this episode, we're counting down the top 10 serial killers who used aliases to carry out their deadly deeds. Get ready for some of the most disturbing and twisted tales of deception. Number 10. Physician Marcel Petiot. In the midst of World War II, a man known as Dr. Eugene offered a service that claimed to smuggle people out of occupied France to South America. But the grim truth was that Dr. Eugene, whose real identity was actually Dr. Marcel André Henri Félix Petiot, never sent anyone to South America. Instead, he injected his clients with cyanide under the pretense of administering vaccines to prepare them for their journey. After they died, Petiot would rob their homes, taking valuables, and then dispose of their bodies in the most horrifying ways. The Gestapo eventually caught wind of Petiot's supposed smuggling operation. Believing he was aiding people to escape France, they set up a sting operation. Yvon Dreyfus, a prisoner, was used as bait, but after Dreyfus disappeared without a trace, the Gestapo assumed he had escaped the country. They began to suspect foul play, leading to the capture of several of Petiot's associates. The Gestapo wanted to arrest Petiot for the deaths of 3 Germans, so he went into hiding, assuming various aliases, including Henri Valery. After the liberation of France, French authorities discovered Petiot's horrifying murders and launched a manhunt. Ironically, Petiot, under his alias, Henri Valery, joined the search for himself. Eventually, he was arrested and charged with the murder of 26 of the 27 bodies discovered at his home. Petiot insisted the bodies belonged to 63 German soldiers he claimed to have killed with a resistance network, but authorities were not convinced. On May 25, 1946, Petiot was executed by the French government for his crimes. Number 9. Charles Ray Hatcher, the master of aliases. Charles Ray Hatcher, a notorious thief, forger, and serial killer, was held responsible for the murders of 15 children, including 11-year-old Michelle Steele, from 1969 to 1982. Hatcher's criminal path began early. By the age of 12, he was breaking into homes. He ran away at 14, spending much of his life in and out of prison. While incarcerated, he was once accused of sexually assaulting and killing another inmate, but the charges were dropped due to lack of evidence. In one of his earliest known crimes, Hatcher abducted and killed 12-year-old William Freeman on August 27, 1969, just 2 days before attempting to kill 6-year-old Gilbert Martinez. A witness reported him to the authorities, but when confronted, Hatcher insisted he was someone else, Albert Ralph Price, despite carrying identification as Hobart Prater. Deemed incompetent to stand trial, he was sent to a medical facility, only to escape on June 6, 1971. Days later, he was arrested for auto theft, this time claiming the alias Richard Lee Grady. Over the years, Hatcher continued this cycle, using various names to elude authorities. In 1977, he was paroled for good behavior after alternating between prison and hospital stays. Shortly after, he was back to committing crimes. By September 1978, he was arrested yet again, this time for assaulting a 16-year-old under the name Richard Clark. Hatcher was released, only to be arrested once more, and the pattern continued until December 3, 1984, when he finally stood trial. During the trial, Hatcher demanded the death penalty, but the jury opted for a life sentence instead. However, just a week and a half later, he took his own life, ending his deadly game of deception. Number 8. John Schmidt, the marrying poisoner. In 1883, John Schmidt arrived in the United States and soon embarked on a murderous spree that spanned over 2 decades. Targeting wealthy women, Schmidt would marry, defraud, and then kill them. Throughout his campaign, he cycled through numerous aliases. Around 1898, he adopted the name Martin Dotz, later becoming Jacob Huff. Under this name, he married a woman named Caroline Hawk, whom he eventually poisoned. After her death, Schmidt sold her house, claimed her life insurance, and staged his own disappearance by pretending to drown in the Ohio River. However, it was all part of a carefully crafted escape plan. He had a boat waiting for him, allowing him to slip away undetected. Years later, he took on the identity Johann Otto Hoch, the name most closely associated with his crimes. On December 10, 1904, he married Maria Walter Hoch, but within a month, he attempted to poison her as well. Soon after Maria's death, he proposed to her sister, Amelia, and married her just 5 days later. Within 3 days, he swindled Amelia out of $750 before fleeing to New York. Suspicious, Amelia alerted the authorities. When police exhumed Maria's body, an autopsy confirmed that she had died from arsenic poisoning. The authorities issued a warrant, and his photograph was published in newspapers. Schmidt, now using the name John Hawk, was captured after his landlady recognized him as the wanted man. His downfall came when he proposed to her within a day of meeting her, raising her suspicions. Schmidt was arrested and on February 23, 1906, was executed for his crimes. Number 7. Karl Panzram, the Defiant Killer. Karl Panzram, born in 1891, was a hardened criminal with a long list of offenses, including rape, arson, theft, and murder. By age 12, he had already begun breaking into homes, stealing a gun from a neighbor, and soon after, he ran away from home at 14. Throughout his life, Panzram spent significant time in prison, where he often clashed violently with guards and managed to escape twice. Each time he was arrested, he used a different alias, even going so far as to alter his appearance to avoid recognition. In August 1920, Panzram committed a brazen burglary at the home of former U.S. President William Howard Taft, stealing a revolver, fine jewelry, and war bonds. Using his loot, he purchased a yacht, which he used to lure sailors aboard, where he would then assault and shoot them, often with Taft's own revolver. Panzram later traveled to Luanda, Angola, where he killed a young boy after assaulting him and murdered 6 rowers, whom he then fed to crocodiles. By 1922, he returned to the United States to continue his spree of violence. In 1928, Panzram was convicted of the murder of 2 young boys, earning him a 25-year prison sentence. Later, he killed a prison laundry supervisor, which led to his death sentence. While awaiting execution, Panzram wrote an autobiography in which he claimed responsibility for 21 murders, thousands of robberies, and acts of arson, and the assault of over 1,000 men. On September 5, 1930, Panzram was executed. Defiant to the end, he spit in the face of his executioner. When asked if he had any last words, he sneered, "Yes, hurry it up, you Hoosier bastard. I could kill a dozen men while you're dallying." Number 6. Henri Désiré Landru, the Bluebeard of France. Between 1914 and 1918, Henri Désiré Landru used the personal ads in French newspapers to target widows who had lost their husbands to World War I. Posing as a suitor, he would lure them in, only to defraud and murder them, along with the son of one of his victims. To keep track of his elaborate deception, Landru used numerous aliases, maintaining a meticulous notebook where he recorded the name of each woman alongside the pseudonym he had adopted for her. In 1919, the sister of one of Landru's victims reported him to the police after becoming suspicious. While she didn't know his name, She was able to track him down by his address. Initially, the police arrested Landru on charges of fraud, as they had yet to uncover the full scope of his crimes. However, a series of documents found during the investigation linked him to several missing women. Authorities soon realized that Landru had likely burned the remains of his victims to cover his tracks. After being convicted of murder, Landru was executed by guillotine on February 25, 1922. Number 5. Herman Webster Mudgett, the master of the murder castle. Herman Webster Mudgett, widely regarded as one of the first known serial killers in the United States, began his deadly career in 1885 under the alias Dr. Henri H. Holmes, or H. H. Holmes, as he's most famously known. After the mysterious death of his employer, Holmes took over a pharmacy and soon constructed a 3-story mansion nearby, a property that would later become infamously known as the Murder Castle. This macabre structure contained a maze of small rooms, trap doors, and hidden passageways, all designed for torture, murder, and the disposal of bodies. Holmes converted the building into a hotel, attracting guests, primarily women, who frequently disappeared without a trace. He used various aliases, including H.M. Howard and Henry Gordon, to charm his victims and cover his tracks. One of his aliases, Alexander Bond, was employed to coerce a woman named Minnie Williams into signing over her property to him. Afterward, he murdered both Minnie and her sister Annie. Holmes also profited from his crimes by selling his victims' skeletons and organs to medical schools. He collaborated closely with Benjamin Petersell, whom he knew as Benton T. Lyman, and a man named Marion Hedgepeth. After his arrest, Hedgepeth revealed to the authorities that Holmes had also used the alias H.M. Howard. This information eventually led investigators to uncover Holmes's gruesome acts, including the murder of Petitzel's wife and 3 of their children. When Holmes was finally captured in November 1894, he confessed to 27 murders, though it is believed he may have been responsible for as many as 200 deaths. His reign of terror ended with his execution on May 7, 1896. Number 4. Raman Raghav, the Steel Rod Killer. Raman Raghav, an infamous Indian serial killer, became notorious for his brutal methods, often using a steel rod to execute his victims. Between 1965 and 1968, he went on 2 deadly rampages in Mumbai, responsible for the deaths of over 40 people. His first spree took place between 1965 and 1966, followed by a second in 1968, which triggered widespread panic. The second wave of murders was so alarming that the police deployed more than 2,000 officers across the city. Vigilante groups also emerged in neighborhoods, targeting homeless individuals and nighttime wanderers, fearing they might be the killer. Raghav's capture happened by chance, when an officer noticed him wandering with blood-stained clothing. Throughout his killing sprees, he used several aliases, including Sindhu Dalwai, Anna, and Thambi, to evade authorities. He had been detained during his initial spree, but was released due to lack of evidence. After being banned from entering Mumbai for 2 years, he returned with a vengeance, resuming his murders once the restriction expired. Raghav's reign of terror ended when he was captured during his second spree. He remained in prison for the rest of his life, ultimately passing away from kidney failure 19 years into his sentence. Number 3. Peter Tobin, the man of many aliases. Scottish serial killer. Peter Tobin had a history of violence long before he was linked to multiple murders. In the early 1990s, he was convicted of raping and attempting to murder 2 young girls, earning him a 14-year prison sentence. Upon his release, he took on the name Pat McLaughlin and resumed his life under a new identity. In September 2006, Tobin brutally attacked and murdered 23-year-old Angelica Cluck, a student who also worked part-time at a church in Glasgow. Tobin buried her body in a secluded spot within the church, near the confession box. Following Cluck's murder, police expanded their investigation into Tobin's past and unearthed 2 more victims in the garden of a home he had lived in back in 1991. Investigators discovered that Tobin had resided in 23 different locations across the United Kingdom, using a variety of names such as James Kelly, John Tobin, Peter Wilson, Paul Semple, Peter Probin, and Pat McLaughlin. He frequently switched phone numbers as well, utilizing over 20 different SIM cards. While Tobin has been convicted of 3 murders, he is believed to have committed many more. He once hinted at having killed 45 additional people. Some investigators suspect that he may be the elusive Bible John, the killer responsible for the murders of 3 women in Glasgow during the 1960s. Ultimately, Tobin was sentenced to 3 life terms, ensuring that he will remain behind bars for the rest of his life. Number 2. Ted Bundy, the charming deceiver. Ted Bundy is one of the most infamous serial killers in American history. Though he confessed to murdering 36 women, investigators believe he may have killed over 100. During his deadly spree, Bundy employed a variety of aliases, including Chris Hagen, Kenneth Misner, Officer Roseland, Richard Burton, and Rolf Miller, among others. Bundy would often approach women in public, pretending to be injured or posing as someone in authority. Once he had gained their trust, he would lure them into a vulnerable position before assaulting and ultimately killing them. His murders were marked by extreme violence, as he often beat his victims to death after sexually assaulting them. On January 24, 1989, Bundy was executed by electric chair at Florida State Prison. His execution attracted crowds outside the prison where people celebrated, some even setting off fireworks to mark the end of his horrifying legacy. Number 1. Angel Maturino Resendez, the Railroad Killer. On the night of December 16, 1998, a man broke into a home near Houston, Texas, where he brutally raped and murdered Claudia Benton. Claudia was alone at home, preparing for a college presentation the next day, while her husband, George, and their daughters were away visiting family. After the murder, the assailant stole Claudia's Jeep and drove it to San Antonio. Fingerprints found on the steering wheel identified the killer as Rafael Resendez Ramirez, a man wanted for multiple murders. By the summer of 1999, police were actively searching for Rafael as a suspect. Around this time, he was briefly detained by the Immigration and Naturalization Service, INS, while attempting to cross into the United States illegally near El Paso, Texas. Despite fingerprint checks, the authorities didn't realize they had him because he used multiple aliases. Rafael Resendez Ramirez was one of many names used by Angel Maturino Resendez, a serial killer, burglar, rapist, and illegal immigrant who frequently crossed the border between the U.S. and Mexico. On July 13, 1999, Resendez was arrested on a bridge connecting El Paso to Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, after his sister convinced him to surrender. Investigators later discovered he had over 30 aliases and a history of entering and leaving U.S. prisons, along with 17 deportations. Though he was charged with 16 murders, it is believed that he may have killed more victims, especially in his native Mexico. Resendez was executed by lethal injection on June 27, 2006. Thank you for joining us on this dark journey through the stories of serial killers who used aliases to evade justice. These criminals didn't just mask their identities. They hid their sinister intentions, wreaking havoc while concealing themselves behind false names. If you found this episode as unsettling as it is fascinating, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest videos. Let us know in the comments if there are other cases of twisted deception you'd like us to cover. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and remember, sometimes the face you see isn't the real one at all.